So we've just gone over how to you deal with frames at a very basic level. And so now we're going to do something that gets us right away into animation and timing just to kind of learn by doing as it is. So this file, which is on Blackboard, and this is the assignment that says frame animation bounce. And I apologize, this is a really long file name that comes from the book. And it does follow pages 158 through 159. So if you need more detailed written instructions, things like that, a review, you can go there and do that. My bounce is going to be different than theirs. So there we go. Now the file, when you get it, there's nothing here. It's in the library. If your library tab isn't up here, you click on the one that looks like a set of books, or you go Window, Library, and it will pop up somewhere. But this is in the library. And to get something out of the library, we simply click and drag it and throw it in here. Quick review of library things. This, and that, and that, and any others I bring in here are all tied to this. So if I go in here and I change the color, change it for all of them. So we have to remember that these things are all tied together. And also, that's not how we're going to be doing this. So, the book exercise. We are dealing with animation in terms of individual frames, but rather than drawing them all out, right, like this, we're going to work with them in a straight ahead fashion. There we go. In a straight ahead fashion, creating an arc. Creating a bit of a bouncing ball animation. Now, for those of you into physics, this is supposing that there was some lateral motion, so it is going to go across the screen. Also, for those of you who like to have everything grounded, I created a new layer. I'm going to call it ground. And I'm just going to put a little bit of a line there. Now, some of you will have it land on the line. I'm someone who has it land as if this is the floor and this is the wall, so it's going to land like here. And if you really want to get fancy, you can also mark off where you want it to land. Frankly speaking, you can mark off where you want it to bounce to. Each bounce it takes should be less high than the last one. There is no rule about how much this degrades. Basically, the faster it goes down, the heavier the ball is, the less bouncy it is. A bowling ball would hit once and then barely bounce and then roll, whereas like a really bouncy ball would come up almost all the way. It would lose very little energy, but it'll always lose a little bit to heat and sound and friction, etc. So, I mark these things out for myself vaguely, and I lock the layer because I don't want to mess with anything. And then what we're going to do is you want to kind of bring these out in order. We're just going to duplicate this by holding down Alt and clicking and dragging. Right? So by doing that, we get little extras here. And the path we want to take is one that's an arc. So we don't want this. No. We want an arc where it's rounder up at the top and a little bit heavier at the, or a little bit punchier at the bottom where it's kind of falling down. And you can see I'm kind of like going up and maneuvering things a little bit. Come down here like this. I'm realizing that's too close. There we go. And again, I'm going in order. If you need to add stuff, we can always add it much later, but if you try to add it now, it's going to be it's going to come out of order when we get to animation. Now, one thing you don't want to be afraid of is having things overlap too much. Right? This feels exaggerated. These are so far apart. That's terrible, I'm moving this. And these are so far apart down here, and they're so close together up here. Yes, that is what you want. That is how this is going to work. Also, you saw I moved this. I'm not married to this little X on the ground because the rest of my animation turns out to say, it shouldn't be there. And you want to kind of go about that. The closer they are together, the slower they will move, and that's what you're looking for at the top of the key, for it to be slower when it gets to the top of the key, and then faster as it goes to hit the ground because gravity accelerates it. Then it hits the ground, bounces up pretty quickly, but gravity gives it negative acceleration till it comes to a stop at the top of the key again and starts to accelerate back down. And through the magic of saved files, I have one that I already worked on because I don't want to have you sit here all day watching me do this. I also dabbled a tiny bit in some squash and stretch. You do not have to do this if you don't want, but if you do, we're going here. Do not just squash like this. Well, first of all, remember that you can change the anchor point right there. There we go. This is not a squashed version of that ball, because when you squash something, think of like a water balloon. When you push it, all the contents go out this way. You have to maintain volume is the official technical term, but it basically means this is not the same size as this. This is tiny, right? So we're going to basically, the more you squash it, if you squash it a lot, you have to really stretch it. And getting a handle on this is just a matter of practice. And how much you squash and stretch it depends on how exaggerated you want it to be. If you squash and stretch it too much, it'll actually, even if you maintain volume, it might look a little bit like it's thinking for itself, which it can be a trick. But here I just did a mild squash and stretch. Make sure it's also pointed in the direction of where it's going. So don't like squash and stretch this way. You need it to point to where its center mass is going to end up. All right. And so you can see I've got a lot of overlap at the tops of these keys. It gets more so as this doesn't get as high because it's not getting as high, but it's still taking a while to bounce. So it's faster here than it is here than it is here. And so right now we just have this kind of drawn out all on one frame. And then the trick is to drag select everything, right click, say distribute to keyframes. And for reasons I cannot understand, it gets rid of the first frame, but then the rest of it plays. And if you really want to watch how it works, you have to hit Control Enter so that you can see it properly. It's still probably going to jump a little bit since I'm doing a record screen thing, and this animation can be pretty heavy. But you might be thinking, this is so simple. Why is Animate struggling with this? Well, you'd be surprised what Animate struggles with. And it is 24 drawings a second. That's a lot. This is not a powerful processing program. This is not Autodesk Maya. This is not After Effects or Combustion or something. This is Animate. And they invented this control test movie for a reason. It's to make a new file, pre-render everything so you can see what's going on. So right away I want you to get used to testing your movie in here to see how it goes. And I mean, mine is fine. It's a little bit blinky because it's traveling kind of fast and there's no motion blur, and so when it goes that far it can be a little bit hard to keep up with. Remember, we learned this in the last lesson, but you can turn on onion skinning. And then I can see, oh yeah, that is a little bit far away. And so maybe I want to see squash and stretch can also help you if you don't have motion blur. It can sort of bridge this divide, right? It can kind of make the distance a little less so. And so it's a little bit easier to, there we go, for our eyes to follow. Because what happens is it gets blinky because of all this, it's traveling from here to here, and that's very far to travel, and there's nothing to bring our eye. And so that's one of the tricks we do, is we use a little bit of squash and stretch. Yeah, that much squash and stretch makes a little bit more sense because of, again, how fast it's going. Things to keep in mind when you are working on something like this, and this is trial and error, and like we started them in one class, we're going to go back to them in the next class, like look at them and give feedback and everything. You are meant to make changes to it, right? You want to have it done as much as possible beforehand, but we make changes to it, and it's meant to be watched and tweaked and then watched again and then tweaked again, and then you look at the onion skin and you figure out where the problem is, and then maybe these aren't squashed enough given, again, how fast it's going, and so maybe I should fix that a little bit. And the period and comma keys will let you frame through, like step through your animation, so that goes to the next frame. So the arrow keys don't work for that. And the space bar does not work to get you playing, it's enter. Yeah, much better. Um, so this is the kind of thing where you are meant to do it and look at it and go back and then fix it and then look at it again and go back and fix it and look at it again. You're not going to get it right the first time. And I'm going to be encouraging you to really look at things and go back and change them. And it's just going to take time and learning what things look like and learning how space and time up here translates into distance traveled and how fast it took to get there. These are things that just take time, but get used to making changes, please, because that's probably the key lesson of this assignment. You're not going to get this perfect on the first try, but I am going to expect you to take feedback to heart and make changes and kind of update things.